Nice. Oh,
Okay.
great. Got a nice crowd. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks so much for joining ProSocial World Summer Research Seminar Series. I'm Beth Hawkins, the Director of Research with ProSocial World. And so I get the honor of introducing Ramona. She is the Professor of Psychology and Director of the Behavior Analysis Program at the University of Nevada in Reno. And she serves on too many committees and boards to list, I think, here. So Ramona's experience, and most of you all know Ramona, but her experience is in behavioral systems analysis, cultural behavior analysis, and verbal behavior. They've guided her research associated with implicit bias, cooperation, and value-based governance. She's published over 80 peer-reviewed publications and co-edited 3 books. She was also awarded ABAI Fellow designation. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Ramona.
Thank you so much for the introductions and once again inviting me. This is a great honor. I have many colleagues here who I have admired and learned from. Dr. David Sloan Wilson was with us a few years ago, 5 years ago-ish, I believe. And he conducted one credit seminar, a summer seminar, visiting scholar with our graduate students at UNR. And that was a very, very powerful experience to have with David. And also had an opportunity to work with him in one of the acceptance and commitment training boot camps here in Reno, Nevada. So it's a great honor, and I've known colleagues here, Robert, Paul, and Stu Lidman, and now it's wonderful to meet you, Beth. And as I'm moving forward with this, I'd like for the audience here to think about the way the content that is being presented here can augment and interact with what has been adopted by ProSocial World. And I appreciate this sort of a comprehensive view of ways behavior science and evolutionary science approach can bring about impact globally. And my work has focused on ways, if I can actually move the screen here. Over the last number of years on ways we can kind of discuss well-being as I've evolved in ways to bring acceptance and commitment training in organizations. I have thought about with my team here at UNR the ways we sort of capsulate sort of dependent measures, the variables that are operating, particularly in organized groups. We call organizations, but I want to kind of call it organized group because it kind of has that sort of a cultural flair, and it really encapsulates ways we think about cultural groups in much more sort of established boundaries in organizational settings. So when we think about well-being in organizations, we've come to sort of discuss it in terms of the levels of aversive stimulation in one's environment, because ultimately, the primary unit of analysis is behavior and environment relation. And coming from a more of a relational frame approach and behavior analytic in general approach, this perspective really also focuses on the cultural repertoires and history of positive reinforcement history, also negative reinforcement history that the individuals bring into their engagement with their environment. So we look at the environment and the individual's repertoire. So you have that sort of objective and also organismic perspective that we bring into our analyses and assessments. So from the sort of a more of an operant level, the way we operate in our environment, the degree to which we have an optimal level of choice is also captured in this context. And the access to positive reinforcement, these are positive consequences that we come into contact with from a more of a technical definition is within 5 seconds engagement with our environment. The consequence from the consequence end of the behavioral contingency, which is encompassing of antecedent, what happens before responding, and what occurs afterward. So that's a 3-term contingency here. And then the degree to which one operates in the context of positive reinforcement contingencies for others. So this is where the sort of a prosociality comes into place, the way we cooperate with others, the way we engage with others, and the way we respond to the contingencies they arrange. And all of what I'm saying is encompassed in the way we, from a different vantage point, try to capture well-being in here. And as Beth mentioned, one of my areas of interest pertaining to this sort of approach to organizational change and the role of organizations in cultural change is how we capture biases. These are, again, going from a vantage point of organisms' engagement with their environment, in this case, human organisms and our repertoires of what we come to learn, what we come to like or dislike, and this sort of established fluent repertoire we develop, cultural repertoires, really guide what we bring to the table when we think about biases, engagement with our world in terms of the preferences we have for stimuli in our environment. And I will get to this in more detail in a few seconds. So when it comes to sort of biases in general, we can have biases toward self, the way we become self-evaluative. Self-stigmatization is a very powerful kind of aspect of the way we discuss burnout and depression from a therapeutic perspective. Also, the way we think about biases toward others, in this case, team practices become important, and biases toward consumers become important here. And more particularly, the recent work we've conducted, recent in this case over a decade, really captures the way we think about healthcare and health disparities. And the examples I'm going to share with you really captures the patient liability from a consumer end of this vantage point. And what I briefly will touch upon tonight or this afternoon or this morning, depending on where our audience is, or our audience members are, value-based approach toward organizational governance is sort of the theme that is going to be discussed throughout what I'm going to present here, particularly in form of the examples that we have built up in terms of the interdisciplinary experiences I've had here at UNR. And how does this whole sort of approach really encapsulates more of a behavioral systemic sort of a vantage point in terms of how the organizations as a whole really bring about impact ultimately in terms of the influence on the immediate community, a local community, and broader, sort of a beyond the immediate community a standpoint, which makes it more of the sort of a discussion of ways organizations can really impact consumers' practices and ultimately cultural practices of individuals that come into contact with the product of organized groups. Variety of products here. And what are the implications of the examples that I'm going to offer here for what can we do in terms of ways to bring our behavior analytic lens, behavior scientific lens, into ways of thinking about a role of psychological organisms, human organisms in cultural change. So the units of analysis become very important, and the interaction between the units of analysis from a more of a research standpoint. So before we kind of get into the sort of a measurement here, very quickly, what do we mean by biases here? If you look at the Webster Dictionary, bias is a disproportionate favoring toward things, persons, groups, when compared with another. This is a relational nature here, usually in a way of, in ways that are considered to be unfair. Is looked upon in a negative way, but we will discuss how dimensions can actually focus on the positive nature of bias and also the neutrality in general as well. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, when we think about groups and the way we engage with one another, and how it relates to biases, if you will. In this case, negative, as we just highlighted in a Webster Dictionary definition. It is sort of a bias toward others originate from an older, less advanced time from an evolutionary perspective, when we humans saw that people look different. This is topographies that are different, the way we look, and arbitrarily assigned characters like stimuli functions or traits to skin colors, hair types, really primarily for the purpose of managing group resources and asserting power over others. It's basically kind of ties it back to the way we, ties it to the survivability nature of the competition. So from a behavior analytic perspective, if we were to think about learning history here, from a behavioral end of it, individual organisms end of it, we respond to our environment based on our learning history and the way we respond to differences in our environment, in this case, topographies. And it is part of our established sort of a cultural repertoire, how we come to learn about our social world based on our interaction with our family members, more of an immediate unit, cultural unit, our families, our parents and siblings, and it's part of development. Our environment, social environment expands. It's from a developmental sort of a point of view. And as we evolve and we come into contact with peers and the whole kind of the stages of development become part of this sort of a discussion here as well. And as part of this sort of a process, we come to relationally respond to events and topographies and stimuli in our environment. And so relational responding, as a lot of colleagues ProSocial world have come to kind of embrace, is a core element of what we refer to as implicit cognition, which is foundational to the theory behind a lot of stuff that I'm talking about tonight, relational frame theory. So from this perspective, we're operating on our environment. So operating responding that it would bring to bear across time and context in a time series way, that sort of ties in with this sort of evolutionary perspective within a given organism's time, a lifetime, becomes a focus, a very important focus here. So as I said, we respond to one stimulus in terms of another, and the way in which we respond to it is very much influenced by the context that we are in and our history that we bring into the context. So all of these factors are extremely important the way I come to see the people around me, the people that I'm familiar with, and also the people that I'm familiar with in the context of a more of a bigger social environment, other people that I'm not familiar with. And how do I come to respond to someone I know in a bigger sort of a social environment than when I'm with them in a smaller environment. So the function and the way I engage with them might change from one context, bigger social environment with many people around us, versus when I'm with them in a smaller room and with a smaller number of people. That's sort of a social element of it, let's say. And biases, the way we come to respond toward or away from stimuli in our environment, is pretty much a normal part of our experiences. When we think about the sort of a conventional literature, bias has come to be seen in a negative way, and it has to be extinguished, it has to be removed. But from a behavioral scientific perspective, when we think about it in terms of the implicit relational responding and implicit cognition, it is basically the way we come to engage with the stimuli around us, toward, away, or be neutral. And it's basically based on the lifetime experiences we have around them. We come to find certain topographies around us as beautiful, not so beautiful, avoid. When people, in certain characteristics, topographies again that we see coming down the street might evoke us moving the other way and change the direction of our path, all of that, or be engaging with stimuli like beautiful kids and puppies and all the stuff that we have around us, and also our food and the way we engage with the food, what we come to find delicious, not so. And of course, psychology interacts with physiology, biology, and also, again, the cultural environment that and the context that we evolve in and expand within. So the people around us, the topographies that we have around us, really in many ways influence the way we engage in teams and people in our community. But the focus of what this presentation is sort of highlighting is the way we engage with with individuals in organized groups, the way we promote cooperation, team dynamics, positive team dynamics that really bring about positive impact, not only at the psychological individual level, but ultimately at the group level, and eventually at the more of the outcome level, which in form of financial and social impact, socially significant, financially significant impact at the organized group level, individuals within it, and ultimately the consumers of it. So this is pretty much what we're trying to capture here. And again, this is part of what we bring to the table, and it is part of our daily life. When we come to sort of capture what I'm saying in form of assessment, then we need to take the phenomena, in this case, implicit relational responding, that we bring into our moment-to-moment engagement with our world, and have a lens in terms of the way we measure it. So measurement becomes absolutely critical in the work we do in here in UNR, in terms of ways to measure the way people move toward or away certain type of verbal stimuli that we put in front of them and force them to respond to those sort of relational sort of networks, the stimuli that we put on a screen. I will show you the assessment tool soon, and say, hey, what we are here to measure are those knee-jerk reactions that often happen in certain type of context, which happens to be fatigue, time pressure, or stress, that really sets it up for us to really lose potentially much of our sort of ways of managing our engagement with our world. So that's sort of a screening that we bring into our moment-to-moment interaction with others in form of social ethics, the what is good and what is not good to do in social environment is reduced in terms of that inhibitions that we have in majority of social environments when we're under pressure, again, fatigue and stress mostly. And how those sort of a brief sort of knee-jerk reactions within few seconds that can alter our decision-making need to be captured and measured. And it's become a very important sort of assessment kind of vantage point for leadership groups that I've been working with, particularly in medical education. So from a behavioral scientific perspective, the brief, immediate relational responding in form of bursts occurs in a much, we could refer to as the implicit responding. And it tends to happen consistently under time pressure. And this consistency of this within a 2 second like a period of responding under pressure becomes the focus of our measurement. And of course, once we pass the 2 seconds, you have the extended, more elaborated responding, which is the So it's a continuum of responding, but we want to capture the first few seconds of it under pressure to depict this sort of aspect of the fluent repertoire, established cultural repertoire that we can capsulate and say, okay, there is therefore a high probability of individuals responding in this knee-jerk reaction if we were to put them in highly stressful, highly fatiguing, under fatigue, and under pressure sort of circumstances. So it is important, though, to appreciate both the behavioral patterns that we capture over sort of a time series, in a time series manner over time. And in some cases, you can have BERS and ERS, brief, immediate relational responding, and extended elaborate relational responding, complementing one another. Okay, but in majority of cases, you could see the differences when you put people under pressure. And that is something that has become very important to, again, leadership decision-making and decision-making in general when it comes to measurement under pressure, pressure-inducing circumstances. So the importance of why BERS are of interest to leadership in medical education, particularly, which I will get to soon, is this notion that they're harder to manage. Those knee-jerk reactions when we're stressed, we're tired, when you're pushing us, they're harder to sort of, first of all, monitor and manage. And that is where we come in with our technology acceptance commitment training to sort of work on or bring about the skill development over time for, in this context, medical education, which I will get to soon. And that is basically what the focus of our work has been when we're in area of well-being, at least in the context of medical education. So again, limited time pressure, stress, exhaustion, and sense of overwhelming kind of experiences and multitasking are the conditions under which BERS can emerge. What we have come to sort of capture and publish on is this sort of a actionable and pragmatic perspective that, and we've talked with the leaders about it, you cannot really extinguish and get rid of, if you will, the established repertoires of individuals, particularly sophisticated people at their later years. So what we can do is, by way of bringing skill development, we can be sort of, or elaborate on more of the positive repertoires, and we can more of the part of the repertoire that we are trying to intervene on. But as I will discuss a bit later, we have seen that inducing or enhancing more of the positive aspect of one's sort of ways of engagement with the social environment, which is the opposite of the aspects that are problematic, can actually be very powerful here. So it's a way to facilitate these dimensions that people bring into their ways of responding socially with others that become the important, more pragmatic ways of discussing this, particularly to organizational leadership. Why? Because they want actionable kind of interventions, and they want to have ways to measure. So speaking of measurement, units of analysis are absolutely foundational to behavior analytic approach to change, behavioral change, organizational change, cultural change in general. And one of these sort of a foundational kind of units that have guided my research and many colleagues in behavior analysis is founded by Dr. Sigrid Len, who introduced the concept in the unit of meta-contingency to behavior science in early 1980s, and that evolved into later 1980s in terms of ways to really fine-tune the unit of analysis. And in this context, the interlocked behavioral contingency is the core of the meta-contingency analysis, in which the behavior of individual and also the outcome of their behavior function as the environment with which the other individual interacts. And basically this could build out to be two or more individuals that are part of this sort of an interlock behavioral contingency that you can easily map. We have process mapping of different functions in organized groups. In this case, functions are people's roles, what they have to do. So when you actually can come to really to identify what needs to happen on a moment-to-moment kind of interactions of a team, if you will, then you can, in a time series way even, or a much more dynamic way, map how one's responding and producing of a product in form of information is needed for the next person to take the information and do what they need to do. So there's sort of a way of mapping what needs to happen can allow for one, a designer, to really establish the way a team should be working. Now, you can say, well, that is a very rigid way of thinking about interlocks. Well, you can make it much more dynamic and be able to sort of see variability within the interlock and capture it by videotaping and coding, if you will, which is something that I could discuss later on. But this is a unit of analysis that is foundational to what we focus on when we're thinking about groups. In terms of the meta contingency analysis, then you have what is called, from a Sigrid Glenn perspective, and colleagues, what is known now as Coltrane, which is a unit of analysis encompassing of interlock behavioral contingencies and the aggregate product. The aggregate product is the product that cannot be produced without the interaction of two or more individuals. So this is basically, the whole is bigger than the summation of its parts. So this is pretty much a very systemic way of thinking about interactions and what parts of the system can, by way of interaction, generate. Without the interaction, it will not be generated, if you will. So you have the aggregate product that is meeting the demand of the environment. So you have this Coltrane encompassing of IBCs and their aggregate product that bring about impact on the environment, meet the demand, and is recurring. And the recurrence makes this sort of a analysis that then allow for us to capture patterns over time. Now, my world, in terms of taking the meta contingency by Sigrid Glenn and then expanding the environment, if you will. And in this case, the environment that is operating on ways the IBCs are recurring and the aggregate products are generated. And the environment in this case is not only what the individual come to see and come to interact with, but is also encompassing of their history of reinforcement that they bring into that interaction. So stimuli acquire certain function that could be positive, we lean toward them, or we move away from them, or we engage with them, or we don't even notice them. And all of what I'm saying is basically is related to what we bring into it. So the psychological kind of element of it, our history of reinforcement, is absolutely critical in discussion of cultural milieu, which is basically foundational to the work that I have pursued here at UNR, which is defined as values and prevailing beliefs, opinions shared by members of organized groups and their community of consumers. And they are pretty much captured in the collection of functional properties inherent in objects, actions, events, and persons. It's pretty much taking what I said before and putting it in more technical terms. And basically the bottom line of it is that the stimuli in our environment acquire certain function to us. They serve or value add, or we respond to them in certain ways that we do as a function of the way we come to learn about them, find them positive, negative, or neutral in our world. And without our interaction with these stimuli, they will not have the function that they have. So those arbitrarily established ways of relating to them based on our cultural history and history of reinforcement is absolutely critical. And how I come to respond to a certain individual, in this case, let's say a leader, might be similar, hopefully, or different from my colleagues. So basically, as we come as a group to respond to a leader in similar ways, then for the leader to sort of influence us, in this case, in positive ways, become much more actionable than when you have more varied ways of responding among two or more individuals in a given organized group when you think about leadership, the function of leadership. So the more cohesive this sort of way of responding is, the easier you can bear influence ultimately on the way you want for individuals, or you design the contingencies for individuals to respond to you. I'm thinking about leadership here, which is basically the focus of our work here at UNR. So you'll have the cultural milieu. Within the context of that, then designing interlocking behavioral contingencies become much more powerful. They bring about the aggregate product that meet the consumer demand, in this case, shape the consumer practices. And the way the consumers respond to people who come into contact with the aggregate product becomes absolutely critical in our interventions. So the feedback that we receive in terms of social validity, the added value that our product and what we do, our communication, our human service technologies, and all of ways we can think about the aggregate product, how what we do really alter the lives of the consumers, and how they can, how do we establish ways for them to communicate the value adding or not adding function of it, so that we can, through group rule generation and changing the dynamics in organizations which operate on rule, based on rules. Much of our behavior in organizational settings are rule governed. We come to follow rules. As soon as I walk through it, the campus, I come under the influence of campus rules, how I need to operate. It's the context that sets it up for rules to govern here. So this sort of a dynamic then shape our ways of thinking and ways we come to communicate our world. Now, when it comes to values, you heard about values as part of the definition of milieu. Then what do I mean by values? Those of us who are focusing on bringing back to the world and acceptance and commitment training, this will really be very much relevant to it. So at the psychological level, we've come to identify values as self-identified overarching life reinforces. Bottom line is the type of person we want to be, what we stand for, what is important to us at a family dynamic level, our personal lives, and also professional lives. So we have different types of values that really guide who, hopefully, and that is the bottom line of ACT, is to orient us or bring us in contact with our values. A lot of times people really don't have a very clear understanding of what is important to them. And interestingly, when you bring them in contact with ways to guide their values clarification, it really, that alters the way they respond to their environment. And in majority of cases in organizational setting, one of the things that we tell leaders is that if we put if we bring ACT to your groups, you know that you might lose some of your people, because you, in many ways, you set the occasion for them to really think about who they are, what they're about, and what is important to them. And that can actually shake it up, and for them to say, okay, I might not belong here. you really enlightened my perspective. So it is a very important aspect of discussion of values at the psychological level. When it comes to social values, we have talked about it based on a foundational perspective on social values from B.F. Skinner, one of the pioneering figures or the father of behaviorism, behavior analysis. According to this perspective, when someone behaves with respect to the contingencies arranged by others so that their response reinforces the behavior of the person or persons who manage those contingencies, we say that they have values, basically. So it's basically what I'm responding to, what you're bringing to me. I'm cooperating with you. And also the way you set up the contingencies, I respond to the contingencies that you have arranged. So that's basically this vantage point. And ultimately, what we have then taken on from the both sort of a vantage point, psychological, social, bringing it to the organized group is we discuss the organizational values as capturing of leadership, ways of organizational leaders, sort of ways of demonstrating value when they design environments in which the workers, the team members are encouraged and supported to manage their own environments in accordance to a set of organizational objectives. So basically what this is bringing to bear is what is referred to as free operating approach. You're reducing rigidity or hierarchical kind of ways of management, which is very rigid way of you do this, you get that, which makes it very much aversive, sort of a way of influencing others, to more of a loosening the rigidity and what people have to do moment to moment, and allow for the individuals to bring their knowledge, their experience, and ways of responding to their environment, and frankly, establish what is referred to as autonomy. So the more we allow people to operate on the environment with less rigid, rule-driven sort of contingencies, the more we can optimize their productivity and efficiency, and also their engagement, positive engagement in the environment, and retention is much more promoted this way than compared to more of a traditional rule-governed hierarchical organizational management. So organizations therefore have values when they act with respect to the good of the group, which I think is a very pro-social approach to think about it. So if you were to think about, again, comparison of rule governance to value-driven value governance approach, in this context, when you think about rules as a stimuli, a set of stimuli that occasion responding on the part of two or more individuals, a rule-driven or rule-governed approach is setting it up for individuals to act in order to have experiences that is less aversive. So it's an aversive control. So you're pretty much avoiding negative reinforcement. It's management by negative reinforcement sort of a way where you can have statements like, I do what I do to avoid my boss and what they bring whenever I talk with them, which could be very negatively punishing or negatively functioning sort of ways of engagement. So it's that avoidance versus engagement that is captured at the bottom here, whereby rules in organizations are set up to sort of for individuals to sort of, as they come into contact with it, to action in order to have more experience of value. In this case, for instance, I engage with others to promote learning, respect, and compassion toward others. So it has that motivating operations, altering the reinforcing function of working with others rather than avoiding in many cases, management and leadership. And actually, this sort of a style of management reduces team dynamic, frankly. It promotes competitiveness reduced cooperation or lack of cooperation. So basically, a value-based governance in this case, the components of it, the primary components of it, encompasses, in this case, leadership or leaders explicitly stating the organizational values, what they stand for, what the organizations stand for. The majority of cases is articulated by stakeholders, and organizational values correspond with organizational processes, meaning you put together the contingencies that align with what you said you would do. They correspond. You're just not providing lip service to others. You actually set the contingencies such that which you articulated in what is important to you is actually showing up in terms of the way people are managed, are allowed to engage with the work contingencies that you put in place on a day-to-day basis. And well-being is a core value in these organizations, and well-being is a core value in the environment. So how do we then, bring this sort of approach to leaders that see value in bringing value, positive value, to their staff, to their consumers, in this case, medical students, and ultimately to the environment, eventually the recipients of medical services by the consumers, in this case, students, in form of patient care and all of that. Eventually, environment in what I'm saying is eventual place that these individuals will be working at. So I'll just very quickly, the very quick set of examples I'm going to have to run fast on this one. Very important example that Stu and other colleagues have heard about here is capturing of the work I've done with the colleagues, leaders in medical education at the University of Nevada, Reno School of Medicine over the last 12 years. And what we've done is bring this sort of a model of governance to at the leadership level. They have, majority of them have come into contact with this sort of the vantage point, the dynamic of a meta contingency analysis that really gives them a broad view of ways what they bring to the table can ultimately shape the repertoires of eventual consumers. In this case would be the patients, that the aggregate products, in this case, students of medical education will be interacting with, is the medical service. And what we have done is really alter the values and policies and rules that govern and shape their curriculum to promote well-being, bring well-being at the individual student experience level to reduce potential buildup of burnout, which is inherent and is part of what experience in medical education is, systemically speaking. And what we have done is bring their attention to the ways what they do is really is influenced by the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, which is an accrediting group that has promoted this sort of approach toward pro-well-being and pro-bias management. And it's a bias movement in medical education has been absolutely visible and driving many medical education curricula across the nation in the United States. And so therefore, one of the cultural milieu stimuli in this case, or that function very effectively and is seen as an important source of rule alteration, is this liaison. And also what is demanded, as you can see on the images around the box here, in terms of making sure that there are meeting the sort of demands of the scientific training and the learning that needs to be guided by what the sort of a medical science brings to the table. Also what they do as it is shaped by the immediate local government that you see. This is basically what you see by these images. Also pretty much diverse sort of a population of students and also consumers in terms of religious diversity, and also diversity in general across different dimensions that I will speak about, and also the sort of a way that they need to compete with other medical education settings. So that competition is also part of it. Other universities, other medical education entities in the United States. So I'm just pointing these out for you to see what the milieu encompasses and what is driving basically their value statements that they have to put in place. So basically, now at this point, the values that are captured on UNR Med website are as follows. They are about people, innovation, serving with integrity, and really succeeding with trust and respect. This is where cultural humility comes into play. We have 4 pillars that we are focusing on in our work: implicit bias assessment, burnout management, interprofessional education and training, which I'd like to get to if I can tonight, and managing bias in areas of the admission and search committees. We have made very good use, elaborate use of implicit relational assessment procedure, which has been introduced by colleague Dermot Barnes-Home and his team in Ireland, and has been tweaked and modified from their end. And we have a modified variation of it that we've developed over the last 10 years here. And it's a computer-based assessment. It really captures the knee-jerk reaction of students in this case. In this case, knee-jerk is captured within 2 seconds of responding. You see on the right-hand side, the sort of stimuli that show up pop up in fast sort of a pace on a screen. In this case, we're trying to capture their biases or implicit identification with certain stimuli on the screen. In this case, I am carrying, and we force them to respond in an agreeable way or disagreeable way across blocks, and measure the latency of responding. And that becomes the point of sort of consistency, how quick they respond when we force them to agree, and how quick they respond when we force them to disagree. So the positive stimuli, which kind of depicts the identification with positive stimuli of competence, caring, enthusiastic, and positive, compared to negative, callous, drained, overwhelmed, stressed. So these are then come to be noted as positivity bias toward the positive stimuli that I just went over, and negativity bias. You see what I'm saying? So that's what we're measuring here. And basically at the bottom, we're highlighting why IRAP is more of encompassing of better ways of managing not only the negative repertoire, but also the positive repertoire compared to implicit association tests, which is much more established nationally speaking and globally speaking. Again, this is the label stimulus, a target stimulus, and I pretty much highlighted how they need to respond under pressure over time in blocks, across blocks. Okay, these are the areas of biases that we're measuring at UNR Med. There are pretty much across basically 8 different grouping of biases, but what I'm going to focus on very quickly are the 2 categories of cooperation and burnout. We have brought acceptance and commitment training to really facilitate, bottom line, their contact with natural contingencies of living according to their value, in this case, students. And there is a very established approach to competition and self-isolation and not demonstrating one's vulnerability in medical education. That is extremely part of that tradition of you need to come across as tough, competitive. So there's a high probability of students really becoming very infused with their own world and not engaging with what they need to engage with, and really demonstrating and discussing their stresses. And that is pretty much foundational to the build of stress to burnout over time with students in medical schools across the nation. And this is like traditionally established approach. So basically the purpose of ACT curriculum is to really bottom line to understand oneself first and then others, and understanding one's prejudices and misconceptions. Engage in continuous self-monitoring is a huge part of this, and really capture the power differentials in working relationships, particularly acknowledging that their role that they bring into their interactions with their patients and their medical teams, and the awkwardnesses that they might be setting up in terms of the stimulus control, and be aware of that dynamic, and develop an attitude and approach of not knowing, and become better listeners and come to learn from their patients and their coworkers and their team members. And that is what we're hoping to build up here. I'm coming to an end soon. So these are the publications that have come out of this work, just samples. Very quickly, I want to show a few slides left here of the work we've done in the area of interprofessional education, the team dynamics that I want Robert for sure to see here. And we have basically, in this case, we are focusing on decision-making under time pressure in medical settings. Medical errors are among the top 4 causes of death in the United States, and that is alarming. And much of it has to, I mean, from a national kind of analyses, the root cause has been identified to be communication. And basically communication in general, the inaccuracy of communication among medical teams in these very fast, high-speed dynamics. And when they have conducted process analyses across the nation in medical settings, one of the components of the process in the routine workflow is the handoff situation, when one team leaves and another team comes in. So basically, that's what we focused on for this particular project. That was a dissertation of one of my students and has been published in professional education. So we brought over 120 students, 110 students in contact with this process. Half of the group, these are first year nursing students, and half medical students, my apologies. And we utilize a comparative pre-post design to examine the effectiveness of a communication training, and also capture the additive influence of acceptance and commitment training. So in this case, half of the group received inpatient settings accelerating safe sign. This is IPASS, which is an established training in medical education for team development, team building, and leadership building. And we combine it with ACT. And another group came into contact with IPASS training, and we just put in the interpreters in healthcare training just to have another educational content that was not ACT. So they have equal amount of exposure to content. These are 12 simulators at medical school here. So a student, one door will open, medical students come in, and they wouldn't know who would be coming from the other end. It would be a nursing student, and there would be a dyad, basically. And then you see that they have a very established audio visual kind of a setup, very high fidelity setting, and would be was the target of our analysis to kind of capture their interaction in this setting that is very much identical to a medical setting. Basically what we have here, very quickly. Overall, across analysis across both groups, what happened was we had increase in duration of interaction as a function of exposure to our training components across both groups, experimental and control group that I just highlighted, which is showing that the overall training, even at the IPASS level, increased duration of interaction and accuracy. In this case, the errored information, omitted information went down and accuracy went up. And that was the foundational in our publication there. And in terms of the ACT training, those individuals who came into contact with ACT, the group that had the additive exposure to ACT compared to the group that did not, had absolutely more of an observable a kind of enhanced measures that you see in terms of the accuracy, less missed information, less errors, and less omission, and the synthesis in terms of repeating what the other individual is saying, which is the demonstration of understanding, not just saying, hi, I can nod and understand what you're saying when they're not, went up. So that was pretty fascinating as well. So that is part of it. And at the very quickly, I wanted to sort of add on, in addition to this sort of interprofessional element of it, we have a built-in recurrent set of measurements that captures burnout and cooperation biases. Remember, I showed you all the areas of implicit bias, but in this case, I just want to highlight a couple of predominant sort of measures in terms of burnout and cooperation bias measures that we keep measuring over and over longitudinally. And it comes at the beginning, what is called training called MedFit. It comes at the end of the block 5, where this is where they come into contact with their exams, their practice exams, and also step exam that's get them set up for the ultimate examinations that are coming their ways. These are the major milestones that they have to meet. And then the patient care, this is where they come into contact with the standardized patient. These are actors that they hire in those simulations to demonstrate their skills. So you have here the competency measures that are captured. Here you have skill, established skill measures that can be captured. So we are trying to kind of capture the impact across these areas. So what I want to highlight very quickly in a few seconds here are some of the findings that we're writing up. We already published and writing up for publication that captures the level of flexibility, which is captured at the via acceptance and action questionnaire, which is a battery that has been developed by colleagues that have brought ACT to over 600 randomized trial studies that are absolutely astonishing. So it's a validated tool to measure psychological flexibility in conjunction with the implicit bias, positive, negative, toward cooperation and also burnout measures that I mentioned here. And then ultimately, we have collected some academic performance measures that I recently shared with Robert and Stu and some other colleagues here. So in a nutshell, these data sets overall have shown so far greater psychological flexibility being related to implicit identification with positive words. Those are the positivity bias that I mentioned, and greater for cooperation bias and higher exam scores. So these are very important outcome measures that have come out of our longitudinal data pertaining to burnout and interaction of burnout with cooperation and performance outcome measures, those tests that I highlighted. So importantly then, our training is helping us move the most inflexible students. These are tagged at the beginning, coming into med school, they come into contact with AAQ, towards significantly greater psychological flexibility as a function of exposure to the ACT curriculum that is pulled across different at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. And it's bringing us in contact with greater outcome measures. Interestingly, among the inflexible students that we have captured and kept track of across a pool of data sets that we've had longitudinally, those who had the greatest pro-cooperation implicit bias, meaning they are pro-cooperative as a function of exposure to ACT, those top 25% with the highest level of valence for the positive pro-cooperative kind of measures, they significantly outperform their flexible peers on exam scores. So at the beginning, when they came in, they were pretty much inflexible. they were tagged as vulnerable students in terms of really making it through. And as a function of exposure to their curriculum and our ACT curriculum that is embedded, they came to actually those at the higher 25% outperform their peers that came in, normal peers with higher psychological flexibility from the beginning outward. Does that make sense? So they outperformed those guys. So it seems that the ACT training has been helpful in terms of promoting psychological flexibility and really the implicit identification with the positive words over time, which has become the emerging target in terms of our measures. Remember at the beginning, I said that the implicit bias in terms of negativity bias, how do we reduce it? It's not necessarily reducible. What you want to do is capture what can be managed and maintained in terms of the positivity in this case, despite negativity increasing over time because of the inherent systemic variables that affect induced stress over time. So what we're trying to say is that this measure of positivity is important for us to focus on. And maintenance of it, nurturing it is absolutely critical in helping these students thrive. So we're expanding our leadership this approach at the leadership level, getting faculty involved in more direct ways. And the healthcare system in Nevada is very interested. And actually, there are, as we speak, 2 other med schools in West Coast that are waiting for us to bring this approach to their setting, and we're getting geared up for multi-site replication. So with that said, I'm going to stop right now. I'm a few minutes over time, but I took exactly 60 minutes to do this. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm open to questions and comments here. Yes, Susan. Oh,
I think she's clapping.
I know, I just like clapping.
Yeah, she's clapping. There were a couple of questions in the chat that maybe we could start off with, Ramona.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Let's see.
Thank you.
Maybe Glenn or Exman, would you want to come off mute and ask your question, or would you like Ramona to just read out what you wrote?
Yeah, sure. I can ask my question. Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was great. Although some of the terminology I'm not 100% familiar with, so I didn't get as much as I could have. But one thing that I'm interested in is knowing the type of positive reinforcement that was done during this. Trying to help these. The service providers provide good health care.
Excellent. In this case, what ACT training offers is ways for students, in this case, or healthcare providers to sort of become more self-monitoring of their sort of psychological experiences that are inhibiting them from engaging with their social environment and with others that they haven't interacted with before, and seeking support from like other students, let's say in medical education, and studying with others, learning from others, because they self-isolate and they don't engage with others. So as you become more engaged with your environment, you come into contact with the positive experiences, natural positive experiences that otherwise you would not have. So you have these aha moments. This is cool. Actually, thank you. This is actually was helpful. So your repertoire expands. Oftentimes we become so isolated, and by way of constructing, oh, I better not engage with that. So you start constructing the world around you. What this approach brings in is the way you move away from construction and engagement. So that experiential element of it is allowing for those automatic positive consequences to be experienced. So that's where positive reinforcement comes.
Yeah, but how did you get those students who were high in inflexibility? How did you get them to step out of their comfort zone to do that?
So this is the acceptance and commitment training that I didn't get a chance to go over. So it's a technology that is a training process that we have put in place. These are over almost 4 hours of online modules that they come into contact with that are combined also with in-person 2-hour engagement with faculty and peers that we've trained, that sets it up for them to engage with components of ACT that is more like engage with the present moment. The present moment kind of awareness becomes important, and how to sort of, by way of observing their experiences, to really acknowledge their kind of self-talk, like I'm not worthy, I shouldn't be here, I better leave. Really be able to we do a lot of that and come to sort of be able to observe our thoughts monitoring wise. And that is where you become more engaged and really learn not to allow those thoughts to really affect the way you engage with your world. Then let go of them and hold on to the good thoughts, positive thoughts, and let go of the negative thoughts and accept that they are there with you, but learn how to let go and move forward and engage with your environment. And also foundational to it is what is important to me. Let's help you find out what is important to you. What do you want to do? How do you want to make use of this experience at UNR Med? Is this really for you? Or why are you here? What is important? So the more you come to know what is important to you, and the more you come to know that you are inhibiting your own way of engagement by isolating and trying to be competitive, but that let go of all those negative thoughts that come with it, paranoia, I don't want to engage with others, I need to not show my vulnerability, but let go and engage with your environment, the more you will come into contact with really very natural, potent consequences of social interaction with other people that are really powerful and move you forward. You see, that's what this training offers people and makes them more flexible, makes them more open.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ramona.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. You answered the
question. It was a beautiful 5-minute tutorial on So Ramona, could you say more about the individualistic nature of med school education, starting with pre-meds and then continuing in med school? And I have in mind a number of things, but maybe you could just elaborate on what you said about how individualistic it all is. It forces individuals to compete with other individuals, maybe operates against teamwork. And that's a selective filter, which means that the people that succeed in getting into med school are a very biased sample.
Absolutely.
And biased in a way that's unfavorable to working with them from this perspective. So I'd love to have a little bit more from you on that.
Excellent point. I really appreciate that. I actually, before this presentation, a couple of hours earlier, I was on the phone with Associate Dean of Medical Education, who was brought on board a year and a half ago, the new Associate Dean of Medical Education. And she is saying that, could you help us with the leadership training part of our curriculum, which is the interprofessional component of it. I'm like, okay, let me kind of say a bit about our history of work in this area. And I gave her a bit of a spiel over what I just presented to you. And while she was trying to sort of offer this sort of opportunity for our expansion, she sort of highlighted by way of selection. We have a bunch of competitive students who are becoming more aware of diversity, equity, inclusion issues of the United States. I mean, we're in a world now that is very different than the world even 2 years ago. So these students that are coming in, first of all, by virtue of DEI operating, they are recruiting more diverse population. So they want their medical students to really represent the community. So you see more diversity. With that diversity comes unfamiliarity to the medical educators. There are population of students that they haven't had before. In the past, they were topographically more white, from families that are more educated, or if they're underprivileged, but you had less diverse than you have now. So with those diverse repertoires come new kind of variability of ways of who are we working with, who are we training? So it's becoming more perplexing for them, but they're all very competitive. Of course, they come into it having to be, because they have to perform. So that is where the juggling comes in. Like they are seeing the value in training these individuals with diverse histories and competitiveness that makes them less susceptible to cooperation and more competition, to become more pro-cooperative, more pro-team dynamic, because they have to eventually work with nurses, social workers, and physician assistants and others in medical settings. And they need to have all of these check marks in front of their training when they move on to clerkship. So I don't know if I answered your question. So you have this sort of a historical selection factors, competitiveness, less susceptible to cooperation. On top of it, diverse, which is unfamiliar to medical educators.
Yeah, well, there's several more people lined up, but having written many letters of recommendations for undergraduate students, I know that people that are grooming themselves for medical school, among other things, they engage in all kinds of volunteer activities. They're parts of ambulance corps. They've done this and that, which is often quite communitarian. So it's a little bit paradoxical. And I also wonder that since it's all so difficult, if students grooming themselves for med school don't team up into small teams to study together and stuff like that to a degree. So I don't think that there's an answer to that's just a comment. Basically, we should probably get on with some of the other questions. But it is strange that on the one hand, it's hyper competitive at an individual level, but on the other hand, the whole impulse to become a doctor and many people, and part of the volunteer activities and what they do to groom themselves involves cooperative activities.
Very quickly, they moved away from traditional lecture-based to block-based. This happened many years ago, and I've been part of this transition with them. So what they are moving toward more experiential training from moment one. They want people to engage. They want people to engage with others, as you're saying, build it into their curriculum so that cooperation is part of the learning experience. And so you have the books that they need to know their knowledge has to be captured through competency measures that I showed in form of exams, but the skills need to also be measured ongoingly, in these blocks, working in teams rather than just read the books and take the exams.
Right. Thanks a lot. So, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Ramona. I mean, your work has inspired me from the first time I was introduced to it, and it's been a real pleasure to get to know you and even learn more now. And the thing that did inspire me was, you've been able to show that we can consciously choose to show up and compose ourselves and think about how do we want to be received by others, which is the essence of psychological flexibility. Even when I'm under pressure and I just feel like checking out, or dismissing the other person, or there's a freedom, to show up and act in the service of the quality of the relationship you want. And what your work in, just the rigorousness of it, and the fact that you're being able to demonstrate that if we can become better at actually choosing how we want to be received by others, it actually ends up shaping the culture of the institution. So in some of your earlier talks, you showed that by doing this work with students, up to 10 years later, the quality of the very quality of their presence is actually creating a more pro-social institution within their hospitals. And so my question is, I mean, your focus on psychological flexibility and the function of language has demonstrated that just developing that capacity will reshape culture. But as you know, in pro-social world, we're also folding into that an explicit orientation toward the core design principles introduced by Eleanor Ostrom and the sensibilities of David about, consciously varying and selecting responses that it allows to evolve. And I'm kind of wondering, what are you noticing? I mean, you kind of got a sense that when these more pro-social environments emerge, are they naturally orienting toward the design principles and choosing to select and retain practices that are going to enhance well-being?
Basically, I would say that in terms of having more of a stronger group identity, in terms of one of the core principles here, to me, the values clarification, knowing that, also capturing it from a leadership standpoint, stakeholders, identifying the values and operating under the sort of a standing of those values. And also through the act element of it at the students level, we are clarifying their values. So value identification, to me, really promotes that self-identity component of it. Why are we here? What are we offering you? Who are you? And what are you bringing into it? Are we aligning? And let's give you the skills you need to really engage and in the service of your values and that other people's values. And really the cultural humility component of it really allows for this sort of a engagement and operation on the environment, and allowing the environment, in this case, other individuals, to sort of bring their history to you, that social value part, that Skinnerian component that I talked about. So I really do think that is inherent part of it, and to me that is foundational, and the sort of the fair and inclusive decision making in this case would be another kind of a component of it, that really, if you are thinking about it from an interprofessional education part of it, the more you are engaging your teams and you're opening up the flexibility part of it, the dynamic that you are operating under as a leader of the team, which these guys are, it really allows for that equitable way of decision making, in this case, under pressure. I'm just pulling it into the sort of stuff we're trying to do here. And I do think as part of what they come to learn, this sort of a graduate responses to helpful behaviors part of Ostrom's is also part of the dynamic as well. The more you become self-monitoring and monitoring of others, the part about the humility part, compassion, all of that, empathy and compassion part of it really allows for that element of it to play a big part in these teams. I'm just, again, focusing on it. And I do think the authority to self-govern is absolutely here in a way of setting up ways to really allow for one to come to know one's rigidities and self-doubts and all the stuff that comes with the fusion part of it, and really open up and engage with the environment, and then really find value in that sort of ways of of exposure and experiential elements of it to operate on the environment and then engage with your environment. So you see, I'm just trying to see how all of these components really align in many ways. And we could kind of, I would love to write a piece about it, like how they kind of
exactly
really do. And then what these kinds of repertoires also promote is conflict resolution part of it become hopefully much more subject to influence. If you are about engaging with others and knowing one's own sort of deficiencies and accepting them and be open to engage regardless or despite these deficiencies, then allows for conflict resolution ultimately. I mean, these are all, and being able to have that sort of a situational awareness from a leader perspective on like the way your team dynamic operates. You see how I can kind of going, and of course the financial equity, all of that really, that could be designed by the leaders that are governing based on value-based approach. That check mark another part of the core design. Did I answer your question?
No, absolutely. You more than answered it. Beautiful, Ramona. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
And you displayed an impressive awareness of the core design principles. You got an A+ for.
And we should write something about it. You're quite right.
Absolutely. Love to. Faye and Florian. I'm sorry, Florian has been waiting for a while there. Sorry.
No need to apologize. I think my question is similar to Robert's, but maybe a little bit even more pragmatic. I'm kind of curious, as you're trying to shift, let's say, a culture and organization, like beyond the individual act training, shift that towards something that's more value-based governance, these kind of things. What have you found maybe to work well in terms of where to start or how to sequence things to kind of get that shift and evolution towards something new started?
Excellent question. I have been fortunate to sort of been able to work with people who design contingencies. So to me, ultimately for value-based governance to be developed and maintained, you need to have the leaders' repertoires altered to sort of let go of the hierarchical, control-driven, aversive control-driven, military style sort of approach, which is really the way you see much of the world. I don't know, it's sad. To sort of more of a matrix model, more of a team dynamic, openness to listen to your workers, not have they operate based on hierarchy, but ways you can allow your team to bring their expertise, their ideas, to work setting on a moment-to-moment basis, move away from supervision to more self-managing teams. And that's how we kind of have done this. And the more you move, as you start having like, hey, the idea of why don't I let the team, first of all, let's identify the team, the strengths and weaknesses and how we can actually like core design element of it, like see who can bring what to the table. And allow for the teams to sort of give us the ideas that they want to sort of implement on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. I mean, you can really do it in different ways and let go of me trying to micromanage them and let them bring their ideas to me and let's implement them and report to ourselves. And you can even put measurement stuff, scorecards I've talked about. Actually, I talked with David about this years ago, about how you can actually build in a scorecard system to monitor the outcome of this approach at the team level. And because ultimately financial impact is important in the majority of organizations, even in public sector, you need to have resources to do what you need to do. So financial success is good for the group in those kind of cases. So how do you measure the impact at the financial level and also all these other measures and celebrate it? And in many ways, you can even put together pay for performance system where you can actually have more of a pay based on what you produce and make it really contingent. And a lot of people love that because they can make 3 times more if you do it right than the counterpart if the system does it right. So you have more lucrative kind of experience as a worker, and you can actually feel good at the end of the day because your ideas was celebrated. You were not afraid of your boss walking by because they really are not your boss. They're going to be your facilitator in those kinds of settings. Sorry, I'm going to keep going, and I'm sorry. I'm going to stop now. Faye, you were going to, sorry.
I could listen to you keep going. This has been great. And I work with a performance system in an international NGO, and we operate across 35 countries. And this has just been wonderful. We're redesigning the performance system as we speak. So I'm doing this work. We haven't gotten to the point of a scorecard, but we do hope to get there within coming quarters. But I wanted to ask you a question about the core of your work, the how to practice psychological safety and cultural humility really translates into the work that we do. And it's the core of our approach to some extent, supporting learning and development. And I love the outcomes, the findings that you shared around psychological flexibility. And for us, cultural humility is really important because we have the cross cultures, cross everything, cross religion, cross ethnicity, you name it, cross tribes. Any initial significant findings around cultural humility in the medical school setting that you found that you could quickly share? I'd be interested to hear that.
Excellent question. I think that is becoming more and more important. As I said, the values of med school that I highlighted, respect and humility was one. What we've done with Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion unit of UNR Med is take our one set of our modules, ACT modules, and combine other components of cultural humility training that focuses on microaggressions and that area in that domain. And what we have is a pre-post analysis of how students in a standardized patient, which I mentioned here, you have an actor that acts as your patient. So those measures are going to be published soon. I'll be happy to share them with you. We pre-post analysis before they come into contact with cultural humility training combined with ACT. And post, you see improvement in ways they engage with a standardized patient in dramatic ways, significant socially significant and also statistically significant ways, which we will publish soon. And the cultural humility modules really bring them in contact with ways to really take on the sort of approach that you don't know. You don't know the person that you come into contact with. How do you get to know your patient? Who are they? It's to be curious, be authentic, and allow for the patient to sort of give you information of who they are, what is important to them, what they're bringing to the table. Even if it takes 5 minutes more than usual, it's worthwhile to put them at ease. They see that you value them as you walk in, and other sort of dimensions of body language, eye contact, into the way you introduce yourself and all of that. The psychological posture that you bring into that interaction is absolutely critical to make their training effective. And how do you code those measures by observation and show improvement over time? And we have ranking scales that allow for us to report the improvement over time by way of exposure to ACT training and the cultural humility online modules that discusses it. Did I answer your question? Perfect.
question. Yeah, we're
Oh,
1
sorry.
minute past, but I'm perfectly fine with staying. I know that we've got 2 more people that are interested in asking questions, but I just wanted to point out the time.
Over time, my apologies. Yes, Christopher.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm really interested in this sort of transition from rule-based governance to value-based governance. And one thing I found is that people generate a lot of security from rules.
Yeah.
And so how do you facilitate that kind of step to a kind of values-oriented system, but maintain people's sense of security in rules?
Excellent idea. Excellent question. So, in organizations that are established based on rule governance approach, hierarchical approach, what you end up having are a lot of free riders and social loafers. I'm just saying it out loud. Those who really benefit from the exemplary performers ending up carrying the load, and everyone benefiting based on pay for time. So if you think about the pay for time model in majority of these hierarchical organizations. So when you introduce the value-based governance, which comes with a measurement approach, you are vulnerable, much more vulnerable in terms of what you bring to the table, because you're not hiding behind these rigid, I come in, I do my work and leave. And at the end, if I make a mistake here and there, at the end, of course, it's a fear-driven approach. I could get reprimanded and all of that. But when we've introduced the value-based governance that is built into it, in some cases, contingent pay, which doesn't have to be there, but the value-based governance, when everyone needs to show what they bring to the table, we tell the leaders that you will lose some people. By virtue of coming to know their values as part of the values of clarification, and also knowing that they're going to be vulnerable in the system where the people's contribution is going to be promoted, it's going to be monitored, is going to be socially consequented or financially. So you get ready to let go of some people that don't want to stay. And that is part of the introduction of a value-based governance. And what you end up with, most of the cases, are the exemplars, those who can actually deliver. They want to be seen. They actually want to participate. So you just have to take that risk at the beginning of the implementation at the leadership level. And actually, it's hard for them to lose control too. So, but then again, it's a buy-in that you need to have at the beginning from a leadership standpoint to go toward it. But you can have what I call collaborative leadership. I have the sort of a slides for that I didn't get a chance to show, which is a combination of hierarchical and team-based. So you cannot really go to matrix model very quickly. That's hard. Some people operate that way from beginning, organizations, but it's this collaborative approach that loosens up. I think Stu's leadership group, Stu Libman's colleagues really do that. Am I right, Stu? You really are operating based on value-based governance from what you've articulated and your colleagues so beautifully historically. You want to see a few words about it?
Well, yeah, we have instituted the ACT matrix, both individually and organizationally, in a school-based partial hospital program. And so we use that pretty routinely. It's built into the way we operate. So it's really been inculcated as part of the training along with the CDPs. And then whenever an issue arises, we go back to the matrix and we go back to the CDPs over and over and over again and ask, are we keeping the faith? Are we using this as we approach this next decision or this next challenge that we're facing? So we've really woven it into the fabric of what we do.
And the more
Thanks, Ramona.
Of course, and the more I've seen of your leadership experience and heard about it, you've let go of, you don't have hierarchical approach. I mean, all your leaders are really operating based on team dynamics and ACT matrix model and all of that. Dear David, you have your hand on. Sorry.
So I typed in a title of a book titled "Turn the Ship Around," where a captain of a nuclear submarine employed these principles. And if that's not hierarchical, what would be? And it's a beautiful book, and it just illustrates all of this. And there's no system in which this values-based, what he calls the leader-leader model, as opposed to a leader-follower model, doesn't work. But my question is this, Ramona, and thanks everyone for staying. One view of implicit biases kind of holds them to be quite inflexible, maybe something you learn at a young age and would find hard to get rid of. But the other view, which I think you articulated well at the beginning, is that in our species, we participate in many groups. Each group has its own set of norms and basically its own set of biases interpreted in both a positive and negative way. And if we really take that seriously, then what it suggests is that if you form a new group in modern life and you endow that group with all of the core design principles and so on and so forth, then an identity and a set of biases should form around that group with a lot of flexibility. And of course, would only be in the context of that group. The rub-off effect, we don't know. We'd have to study that. But is that what you think you'd find, that when you form a team or a new group and you endow it with a strong sense of purpose and so on, that the implicit biases will be quite malleable?
Well, what this approach is highlighting is that despite our positive biases and negative biases, meaning moving toward positive or away from certain events and objects and individuals, this is what we come to like or dislike and all of that. The more we come to know about those biases and by way of self-monitoring and all, the higher the probability, if we have the ways of learning. I mean, you could build a cultural group that come to learn how to be better at knowing what's going on under pressure and manage it better and be aware of it. And that self-monitoring becomes absolutely critical. And promoting the positivity end of it and wanting to care, that sort of a compassion, the empathy part that comes in conjunction with, I don't know, you're different, what are you doing here? Let's see, well, let's examine the contributing factor of this new member that's coming into the group. Those questions that come up can be seen in light of what's come to be about openness, about being open despite the differences in topographies, despite differences in that comes or uniqueness of individuals that come in that we don't have a history with. So it's lack of familiarity that becomes more of part of what we come to explore. So unfamiliarity and differences become actually good. Like, let's embrace a difference. Let's embrace unfamiliarity and let's learn from the unfamiliar source what they're about, because we might in most likely ways benefit from their difference. And then have the culture that is open to sort of all of what I said. What we bring into the situation, being open that we have positive, negative ways of thinking about our world, and accept it and be open to differences that are coming in and embrace it. And having that psychological posture moving forward would benefit the dynamic of the group and their adaptability over time. Did I answer your question, David?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
I think I've said a lot, but thank you so much. This has been really powerful experience for me. You're an amazing group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. This was incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
All right, everyone. Great for you to show up. Wonderful turnout.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Skip.
Welcome, Beth. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Thank you.